Friends, I was once giving a sermon in a church, and a woman got up with her crying child, really shrieking, and left the church, and I said, "Madam, it's all right." So the child isn't bothering me. She said, "I know, but you're bothering the child." And I was giving a talk in Canada once on a Sunday, and I noticed that in the theater there were a number of people, men, taking up a collection. And when they finally came up to the front row, where I could see them very well, I leaned over and I said to one of them, I said, "What's the idea of taking up a collection during this lecture?" He said, "To get better speakers for next year." So I am not presenting myself as a model to you on how to talk. It's just merely that there have been so many letters coming to me asking me to give a few suggestions that I will give them to you. They are only personal. They may not apply to everyone, but I will give them to you for what they are worth. If I can talk now, I certainly couldn't always talk. There came a turning point in my life. It was in college when I was a freshman. I was on the debating team, which was in the college that I attended a great honor because they put a tremendous premium on debating. I thought I was good because, after all, I was picked as a freshman. I had to be good. And the night before the debate with Notre Dame University, the coach of our debating team, Father Bergen, called me over to his office, and he said, "You are the worst talker we've ever had in this college." Well, that was a terrible shock to me. I said, "Well, if I'm so terrible, why did you pick me on the team?" He said, "Because you can think, not because you can talk." But he said, "You're going to learn to talk before you leave this room. Take a paragraph out of that speech, any paragraph you like." I remember we were talking on the Merchant Marine. I'll never forget, the paragraph began, "I think it needs no argument to prove," and so forth. So he said, "Stand up there against the wall," which I did. Now he said, "Go over that paragraph." At the end of it, he said, "Do you see your mistake?" I said, "No." "Go over it again." Went over it 1 hour. 2 hours. 2 hours and a half. I was dead. So was he. And every 2 or 3 minutes when I finished it, he would say, "Do you see your mistake?" I said, "No." But being naturally quick, after 2 hours and a half, I saw it. He said, "Do you see your mistake?" I said, "Yes, I think I do. I'm not natural." He said, "That's right. That's all." And he dismissed me. Do you notice how often speakers, as soon as they get up on a platform, or ministers or priests in the pulpit, everything changes, their voice changes, their attitudes, their poses? I think many prayers that we say we're not talking to God. We're talking to an audience, particularly prayers at banquets, and inaugurations, and so forth. And we put on artificial poses. "Oh God, we ask thee to send down upon us thy benediction, thy blessing upon the sailors who are at sea, the merchants at their counting table, the lawyers at their bar." Well, that's not the way people talk. So, being natural and preparing a talk, what would be some suggestions? Now, the way I prepare a talk is not perhaps the way everyone would want to do it, but I can only give you my way. In order to prepare a talk, one must do a tremendous amount of reading. Each one of these telecasts of mine would represent between 20 and 40 hours of study. When I get through, what have I got? Nothing but a bits of yellow pages. I think I have one in my pocket. But before I show it to you, I will tell you what I do. I study, I do research, and I begin to understand the subject. Then, when it gets into my head, I begin to write out points. Generally just 3 or 4 points that I'm going to talk about. I will only write out the heading. And then I will tear up the paper and then rethink what I was saying. So that when I prepare a telecast, there must be 20, 30 to maybe 100 pages that are torn up. And then the closer I get to the end, the smaller the pages are. This is this telecast. And I brought it out here, not because I'm going to refer to it, but just simply because it shows you the points, how small the points are. And by doing a tremendous amount of study, the mind creates an atmosphere for the talk. There is much more air round about us than ever gets into the lung. There's more food at the table than ever gets into our stomach. There are more things to see in nature than ever comes into the eye. And so when one rises to give a talk, one should have an atmosphere, a certain ambient knowledge round about that one can pull in this idea or that, as it were, from the air while you're talking. So that instead of writing out the speech, word for word beforehand, and then memorizing it like this, one thinks it from the head out. That's the reason you tear up the paper, so you don't have any information. You have to think it. Then you write down the ideas again. Well, by the time you get up to talk, you've already given the speech 10 or 15 times. And incidentally, it isn't a bad idea sometimes to talk out loud. If you can find a place in this day and age where you can walk and talk out loud without being counted crazy. How often, for example, students are asked to explain something. They think they know the lesson. When they get up, it's not there. And why? Because they were consecrated and dedicated to a dead page. Never went through their mind. Sometimes teachers are just textbooks wired for sound. And studying is nothing but what is in print, passing from the mind of the book to the notebook of the teacher, or rather from the notebook of the teacher to the notebook of the student without passing through the mind of either. Now, this method of preparation is hard. It's very much easier to write something out and then to learn it than to do it this way. Sometimes if you do not feel well when you're giving a telecast or a lecture, thoughts do not come. You cannot always recall exactly what you had in your mind. But at any rate, there's a spontaneity. That's what people like. Even the mistakes you make. Now, one of the reasons, for example, why people like to have me draw is because everybody in the audience can draw better than I can. They feel they're far superior, and rightly so. So if I make a mistake in talking, fine. That's good. They say, I could do it just as well as that. And they can. This method, while it's harder and is a wonderful preparation for for absorbing knowledge has difficulties. One difficulty is that there are some people who give speeches who must write them out. For example, the President of the United States has to have his speeches written because every word is important. Then, too, there are some things that are not worth learning. John Barrymore, for example, would commit all the lines of Shakespeare by heart. But when he played in comedies and cheap movies and so forth, he absolutely refused to learn anything. He wanted helps outside. Now that's why people on television have to have aids that are outside. I do not use any kind of aid on the outside. If I read anything, I have it written out. Now there are two main props that are used in television. And the first prop is what is called an idiot card. An idiot card is something that is written out so that you'll not forget it. Now just suppose I were teaching you mathematics. Now I would be reading off this idiot card. And I would say to this vast television audience, 2 plus 2 equals 4. 2 plus 1 equals 3. 3 plus 3 equals 6. See, I don't forget it that way. Wonderful, isn't it? Now, you can... thank you for the idiot card. It was not an idiot that held it. It's only the card that's an idiot. And it's impossible for people who are constantly appearing, for example, on television, to study their lines or their commercials. And so they have to have them written out on these cards. But you can always tell, if you just look closely at anybody who's using an idiot card, this is generally the way. So do not be hard on them. If I were saying something that was not worth committing to study, I certainly would use one too. Now there's another prop which is better. And that is what is called a teleprompter. And a teleprompter will have a whole speech on it. For example, when you hear people giving speeches on television, 999 out of 1,000 are using a teleprompter if they do not have the paper before them. Many of the commercials which you hear are written on teleprompters. And a teleprompter rolls. Now, so I was watching a television show once where the teleprompter got caught. And that's kind of hard. Now, for example, if I were using a teleprompter and I didn't know my lines, now this is exactly what I would have written out. My name is Bishop Fulton J. Sheen. My address is 366 Fifth Avenue, New York. See, then I don't forget. Now, this is the teleprompter. These are some of the aids that are used in television, and television simply could not exist without them. And they are helpful, too, simply because one is apt to forget. Many times, you're standing before a television camera, momentarily I can't think of the next point. Well, I'll throw in a story or something till it comes back to me. You don't know it, but I do. I don't get too embarrassed. I don't get flustered because I can't remember it. I remember, I was giving a talk once in Ireland at the Eucharistic Congress. I've forgotten when it was, a long time ago. If there was ever a time in my life I wanted to do well, it was then. And I was reciting a poem that I know just as well as I know the Our Father. It was a poem written by an Irishman, Joseph Mary Plunkett. And the poem was, I see his blood upon the rose, and in the stars, the glory of his eyes. His body gleams amid eternal snows, his tears fall from the skies. I see his face in every flower. The thunder and the singing of the birds are but his voice. And carven by his power, rocks are his written words. And I forgot the next line. Now, the reason I forgot was because I had said something before that the audience seemed to have taken politically. I didn't want it to have political significance. So while I was reciting this poem, I was giving myself an intellectual spanking. And I spanked myself so hard that when I got to the 9th line of this poem, I forgot. And I said to the audience, I forgot. Well, a tremendous crowd there, tens of thousands of jaws dropped in disappointment. And when an Irish jaw drops, it collapses. So I had to get myself out of the difficulty. There came to me then a line of Patrick Henry. Not the one that you know. Oh, Patrick Henry also said something else. He said, when you're in difficulty in an oration, throw yourself into the middle of a sentence and trust to God Almighty to get you to the other end. Friends, I was once giving a sermon in a church, and a woman got up with her crying child, really shrieking, and left the church, and I said, Madam, it's all right. So the child isn't bothering me. She said, I know, but you're bothering the child. And I was giving a talk in Canada once on a Sunday, and I noticed that in the theater, there were a number of people, men, taking up a collection. And when they finally came up to the front row, where I could see them very well, I leaned over and I said to one of them, I said, what's the idea of taking up a collection during this lecture? He said, to get better speakers for next year. So I am not presenting myself as a model to you on how to talk. It's just merely that there have been so many letters coming to me asking me to give a few suggestions that I will give them to you. They are only personal. They may not apply to everyone, but I will give them to you for what they are worth. If I can talk now, I certainly couldn't always talk. There came a turning point in my life. It was in college when I was a freshman. I was on the debating team, which was in the college that I attended a great honor because they put a tremendous premium on debating. I thought I was good because, after all, I was picked as a freshman. I had to be good. And the night before the debate with Notre Dame University, the coach of our debating team, Father Bergen, called me over to his office, and he said, you are the worst talker we've ever had in this college. Well, that was a terrible shock to me. I said, well, if I'm so terrible, why did you pick me on the team? He said, because you can think, not because you can talk. But he said, you're going to learn to talk before you leave this room. Take a paragraph out of that speech, any paragraph you like. I remember we were talking on the Merchant Marine. I'll never forget, the paragraph began, I think it needs no argument to prove, and so forth. So he said, stand up there against the wall, which I did. Now he said, go over that paragraph. At the end of it, he said, do you see your mistake? I said, no. Go over it again. Went over it 1 hour. 2 hours. 2 hours and a half. I was dead. So was he. And every 2 or 3 minutes when I finished it, he would say, "Do you see your mistake?" I said, "No." But being naturally quick, after 2 hours and a half, I saw it. He said, "Do you see your mistake?" I said, "Yes, I think I do. I'm not natural." He said, "That's right. That's all." And he dismissed me. You notice how often speakers, as soon as they get up on a platform, or ministers or priests in the pulpit, everything changes, their voice changes, their attitudes, their poses. I think many prayers that we say we're not talking to God. We're talking to an audience, particularly prayers at banquets, and inaugurations and so forth. And we put on artificial poses. "Oh God, we ask thee to send down upon us thy benediction, thy blessing upon the sailors who are at sea, the merchants at their counting table, the lawyers at their bar." Well, that's not the way people talk. So, being natural and preparing a talk, what would be some suggestions? Now, the way I prepare a talk is not perhaps the way everyone would want to do it, but I can only give you my way. In order to prepare a talk, one must do a tremendous amount of reading. Each one of these telecasts of mine would represent between 20 and 40 hours of study. When I get through, what have I got? Nothing but a bits of yellow pages. I think I have one in my pocket. But before I show it to you, I will tell you what I do. I study, I do research, and I begin to understand the subject. Then, when it gets into my head, I begin to write out points. Generally just 3 or 4 points that I'm going to talk about. I will only write out the heading. And then I will tear up the paper. And then rethink what I was saying. So that when I prepare a telecast, there must be 20, 30 to maybe 100 pages that are torn up. And then the closer I get to the end, the smaller the pages are. This is this telecast. And I brought it out here, not because I'm going to refer to it, but just simply because it shows you the points, how small the points are. And by doing a tremendous amount of study, the mind creates an atmosphere for the talk. There is much more air round about us than ever gets into the lung. There's more food at the table than ever gets into our stomach. There are more things to see in nature than ever comes into the eye. And so when one rises to give a talk, one should have an atmosphere, a certain ambient knowledge round about that one can pull in this idea or that, as it were, from the air while you're talking. So that instead of writing out the speech, word for word beforehand, and then memorizing it like this, one thinks it from the head out. That's the reason you tear up the paper, so you don't have any information. You have to think it. Then you write down the ideas again. Well, by the time you get up to talk, you've already given the speech 10 or 15 times. And incidentally, it isn't a bad idea sometimes to talk out loud. If you can find a place in this day and age where you can walk and talk out loud without being counted crazy. How often, for example, students are asked to to explain something. They think they know the lesson. When they get up, it's not there. And why? Because they were consecrated and dedicated to a dead page. Never went through their mind. Sometimes teachers are just textbooks wired for sound. And studying is nothing but what is in print, passing from the mind of the book to the notebook of the teacher, or rather from the notebook of the teacher to the notebook of the student, without passing through the mind of either. Now, this method of preparation is not, is hard. It's very much easier to write something out and then to learn it than to do it this way. Sometimes if you do not feel well when you're giving a telecast or a lecture, thoughts do not come. You cannot always recall exactly what you had in your mind. But at any rate, there's a spontaneity. That's what people like. Even the mistakes you make. Now, one of the reasons, for example, that camera has one eye out, only one little red light there. It's all right, don't. There are generally two little red lights on top of the camera. That one little red eye is out. It must have been out last night. The subject of this telecast is patriotism. I will give you the meaning of the title in a moment. This is a story about patriotism in the year 2024. A woman was elected President of the United States. The reporters approached the husband and said, "How do you feel about the election?" He said, "I regret that I have only one wife to give to my country." That has two eyes. The title, Quo Vadis America. I am giving this title, writing it down, for the sake of only 3 of you and the entire audience in the United States. Only 3. For the 3 of you who do not know Latin. Quo Vadis America. If you have ever been to Rome, you may have visited a chapel just outside of Rome. It was erected over a spot where, according to legend, Peter was in flight from persecution in Rome. And on the road, he saw a vision of the Lord approaching him. And Peter said to him, "Quo vadis, Domine?" "Where are you going, Lord?" And the Lord said, "I am going to Rome to be re-crucified." In other words, Peter, that's where you should be. Well, we've chosen that title instead of Quo Vadis Domine, Quo Vadis America. America, where are you going? Where are we going in this day and age? Do you know one of the most unused words that we have in our vocabulary is the word patriotism? Hardly ever hear it anymore. Patriotism is a virtue that was allied to the old virtue of the Greeks and Latin called pietas. Pietas meant love of God, love of neighbor, love of country. And when one goes out, all go out. We no longer have love of God. We have no longer have love of country. We're going to investigate in a particular way today the problem of revolution. We started our country with a revolution. Revolution is in the air today. As a matter of fact, the revolutionists of our day are all arguing and contending that, well, we started that way, therefore we should continue it. So, let us now investigate this question. Namely, we do live in America in a revolutionary tradition, certainly. But the question is, what kind of a revolution should we have? What kind of a revolution? There are two kinds. One, the kind we started with, the other, the kind we have today. What was the kind we started with? Well, I can tell it in the story of an old soldier who had fought at Concord. And someone said to him in his old days, "Why did you go to Concord on that April day? You suffered great oppression, didn't you?" And old Colonel Preston said, "No, I wasn't conscious of any great oppression from a foreign power." "Well, then, it's because you were against the Stamp Act." "Oh, I never saw any of the stamps. I think that General Bernard kept some of them in Castle William, but I never saw them. I certainly didn't fight on account of the Stamp Act." "Well, then you revolted on account of the tea tax." "I never drank a cup of tea in my life. I wasn't interested in the tax." "Well, then you must have been reading Harrington, Sidney, and Locke." "Never read them. All I ever read was the Bible, Watt's hymns, and the Catechism." "Well, then, why did you go to Concord?" He said, "For one reason, in order that we might govern ourselves." That was the American Revolution, to govern ourselves. Now, what's the revolution of today? What's its nature? Violence. Violence just for the sake of violence. That is ours. I mean, not ours. Please God, not any of ours. You or me. But I mean the new type of revolt, which involves destruction of everything that is in the past. And these people who are actuating violence today claim they're in the line of the American Revolution. They are not. Now let me go more into detail, these two types of revolution. Each of these had a character at the head who symbolized the revolutions. The one who best expressed the principles of the American Revolution was Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is the antecedent of all Americans today who believe in self-government. Who's the progenitor of this kind of revolution? Someone who was a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson. Strange to say. Saint-Just, 1793, revolution.
Saint-Just and all who were associated with him in that revolution. Now let me tell you the difference between the two. And here we'll have a review really in pietas and in patriotism. And I will first of all describe what Jefferson taught us, what we believe, what are the conditions of the preservation of our country. Then I will give you Saint-Just, who holds exactly the same thing that the violent revolutionists of today hold in our country. They may not know that they are adopting his principles, but they are. Thomas Jefferson probably knew Saint-Just. They were in Paris together. But in order to do our American Constitution, Thomas Jefferson had to repudiate all of the principles of Saint-Just, whether he knew Saint-Just or not. See what wonderful work the angel does. Knows when to clean, when not to clean. Angel Clean, he's known as, not as Mr. Clean. Let's review the principles upon which our democracy was founded. Then let's review Saint-Just. Thomas Jefferson founded our democracy upon two principles. One, the dignity of man. Secondly, I will just simplify it, all rights and liberties come to us from God. I will explain these, and then we will go to Saint-Just. Without telling a word to my angel, he'll know very well that he shouldn't clean the board at this point. Thomas Jefferson. First, he believed that the government must be founded upon the respect for the individual. So he investigated what are the source of our rights and liberties. Where do they come from? Where does my right of free speech come from? Or the right of assembly, or any other right we have? From the will of the majority? If it did, the will of the majority could take away the will of the minority. Jefferson intended that the majority would be the custodian of minority rights. The rights and liberties come from the federal government? Certainly not. If they came from the federal government could take them away. Taking almost everything else away. We might just as well take away our rights and liberties. But he set it down in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence that it is a self-evident principle, self-evident, that the Creator, has endowed man with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable. They cannot be taken away. Among which are the right to life, to liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is our democracy. Those are the two principles. And isn't it interesting that that particular government and those governments in the world that deny the existence of God are those that deny the existence of human rights? Now, let's go to Saint-Just. What did Saint-Just, and along with him Royer, what was their principle? Their principle was that in order to make people pass through a certain door, there was only one way to do it, and that was the way of terror. Confiscation of property, and the destruction of rights and liberties. Saint-Just also said, a people can be taught to save themselves only by violence. And the path to the establishment of every government must be upon a pile of corpses. That was the thing that Jefferson had to fight against when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He knew it. Wasn't anything new. I'm bringing it up now to remind you that we're going through exactly that same crisis now that Jefferson faced. That our country today has to choose once more between Jefferson and Saint-Just. Which are we going to choose? We're familiar enough with the principles of Jefferson. So I'm going to enumerate for you. It'll be easy to identify the new type of violence that's sweeping our country, our schools, our streets. And I'm going to describe three characteristics. The first characteristic of the new violence of our day is what we will call elitism. Now, this word, I don't know whether it exists or not, but it's the only way that I can describe it. It's taken from the word elite. There used to be a virtuous elite, a core of heroes and saints that very much influenced any culture and democracy. The new elite practices what is called elitism. Namely, there is a dominant minority that makes a lot of noise and that uses violence to force its will upon others. They're revolutionists without a program. They have no flag. They only know what they're against. They do not know what they're for. And taking some words out of Toynbee, they're made up of two groups. Toynbee said the first group was conqueror. I would call one of the groups the man with the bullhorn. He's always the leader. You just watch in any violent group today that follows the principle of Saint-Just, what's the man with the bullhorn? He's the leader of that revolt. Secondly, there are the hangmen, the kind that will rifle desks, destroy property, burn homes, do anything to enforce their will. And then there are the wastrels, the group that just profit from violence, confiscate property to be in on the violence. That's the first group. I have 6 minutes and 7 seconds. So be patient. You'll have to wait about 6 minutes for a commercial, let me tell you, too. Second, mysticism. This is another new characteristic of the revolution. Mysticism is a term that belongs to religion. It doesn't belong, actually, in the field of politics, but has been transposed to politics. Now, what was mysticism? Mysticism was it could best be expressed in the mysticism of John of the Cross. Dodo, e nada. In other words, God or nothing. Either you give yourself to God completely, or else you give nothing. This was spiritual mysticism. The political mysticism is, of course, there is no God. It's my will or nothing. This is what the elite insists upon. No alternative, no compromise. So they would make, in this mysticism, a tabula rasa. They would wipe the slate clean of anything that opposes them. And then after they destroyed life and property, they would ask for an amnesty and immunity. Thirdly, this is not my term. You could very well accuse me of having invented it. I've often thought of giving a telecast on it, but the other day I went into the 10-volume history of Toynbee. And lo and behold, I found Toynbee saying that idea which has been in my mind, namely Satanism. Satanism is behind it, too. This is the third characteristic of it. The world is built on order. There's a plan. So scientists are able to discover the laws of the universe. And in discovering the laws of the universe, men find harmony. This harmony and order had to come from somewhere. It came from God. What is the essence of Satanism? The essence of Satanism is the destruction of that order. The order of law, the order of morality, order of religion, the order of ethics, anything that you please. This is Saint-Just in our day. Believe me, fellow Americans, I tell you that before the flood, in the book of Genesis we read, and in the days of Noah, there was violence on the earth. All of the violence that happens in our country is a fever graph. Read it. And it points to a decay in our civilization. How are we going to get out of it? The reason I'm hesitating here is just because there's so many ideas that I have to choose in the few minutes that are left which one to give you. I tell you one thing that we have to do. We have to realize maybe why the eagle is our national symbol. The eagle always builds its nest high in the mountain crevices. When the young are hatched, the eagle pushes its young over the nest. And they fly down to what to eaglet eyes must seem like sudden death. And just before the young eagle crashes, the mother eagle swoops down from its nest, down to the abyss and catches the young, and then flies up into the sky, swoops from out it again, and repeats the process until the bird has learned to fly. Moses saw that, and he wrote, "As the eagle stirs among the young, so does God stir among the nations." Maybe God is stirring us, bringing us to the brink of danger, in order that we might begin to examine ourselves and restore Jefferson, the dignity of man, and a belief in God. Our nation is too full of those that are crying down. Down with the universities, down with schools, down with the churches, down with teachers, down with government, down with the police. Can you build anything down? You cannot. Certainly time in our nation to change our words. And let's begin now to use the word up. Up from all of this filth. Up from this violence. Up from this indifference of courts. Up to the hid battlements of eternity. Up, up to God. I got a half hour more to tell you about this subject, but we haven't time, so just bye now, and God love you.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees. The bishop wrote 94 books, recorded countless radio shows, and appeared on hundreds of network and syndicated television programs. His legacy is a treasure of joy that transcends time and helps us to believe that truly life is worth living.
Today I'm here with Al Smith, who's been a part of the Fulton Sheen canonization team for over 10 years. Could you share with us an update on his process for beatification?
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of people have been waiting in the wings for a new date. And I try to say to people that in 2019, when the beatification process was paused, and this is not the first time we've had a pause in the beatification. Some people remember the wrestling over Fulton Sheen's remains. His body was entombed in New York City, and yet the petition was to bring his body to Peoria. And so there was a pause for a number of years as the courts wrestled over that issue. And then, of course, the cause was re-engaged when the body came to Peoria. And so this is something very similar. When there was the delay of the beatification mass, it wasn't a cancellation. It was a postponement just to make sure that everything was, I guess I would say, fine and dandy. I know in the New York State, many of the dioceses and, of course, the legislatures and the courts allowed people to come forward with any information they may have. And of course, here it is 3 years later, and there has been no news. There has been nothing negative that has come forward. And so we were recently at the Vatican, our group from Peoria, with meetings with the Cause for the Saints and the different delegations, and spoke to them and said, it's been a couple of years. I know we're giving everybody time, but there's been no negative news. So could you give us a new date for the beatification ceremony? And so we're just waiting for that now. Our meetings at the Vatican have been very positive. There's many people that want Fulton Sheen to be beatified, but because of the climate of the church and the sensitivities that are needed, I think people kind of accepted this delay.
I did a previous video where there was a extension of the statute of limitations that would allow people to come forth if they knew of Sheen or his cover-up or anything like that. And that ended last year. You have not heard anything from any lawyers or city or, I guess, legislative personnel to say, okay, Sheen was involved in this cover-up, so, he shouldn't be beatified, anything like that. Could you go into more of those details?
Right. Yeah, there has been no news like that. Of course, being on the board of directors for Sheen's cause for canonization, there was a lot of the, we call it vetting, where they did the investigations into his years in Rochester, his years as an auxiliary bishop in New York, going through his writings. I know that, again, the Bishop of Peoria took the time to, I'd like to say, collect his writings and all of his videos, and they sent them to the Vatican for a scrutiny. So there was all this time that the Vatican had to check into Fulton Sheen's life. They read the letters of testimony that were sent. They went and watched the videos and read the books, and of course found no error in his writings or teachings. And in fact, in 2012, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, God rest his soul, declared Fulton Sheen venerable. So there is right there a saying from the Vatican: his writings and what he said and his character are just to be venerated, to be imitated. So there is something there. But also, too, the Vatican did look at his track record of his work in New York as an auxiliary, his work in Rochester, and everything was scrutinized. There was always, with every diocese, priests that bring them a little bit of trouble and grief, and those cases, and they were handled well. And so the Vatican had already looked at Sheen's record in Rochester. And again, this is why we said all along to say, why the concern? Because it was scrutinized already. So again, we sometimes wonder if there's a bit of politics in the church, and I think many of our viewers would agree. But again, I think we have to be charitable as best we can with this delicate issue, especially with the handling of priest cases, not just in the Diocese of Rochester, but all over the church.
Can you talk about, I don't know if you were involved in his handling of priests and stuff like that. Can you share any examples, the things that may have been a worry that were cleared, I guess, and kind of ways that he really showed virtue as a bishop?
Right. Well, when you become a bishop, you become an administrator of a diocese. And I know there's people that would say that Fulton Sheen, his role in those years of New York as an auxiliary bishop, and of course being on television, running the propagation of the faith and traveling all over the world, raising money for the poor and the marginalized, that kept him busy. And he wasn't really involved with the affairs of managing priest and diocese. But yet when he was assigned to become the administrator of a diocese and he became the bishop, it was a very challenging 3 years for Fulton Sheen. He said they were hard years. And of course, the many critics, when he would close a school down or close a church down, he was criticized. If he gave money to a certain cause, there was always the critics. And of course, he handled the difficult priest. He dealt with the seminary that needed help, cleaning it up to some degree. Yet, again, there was never a scandal that was made the papers or anything. On all those years, you go through the archives and you never really see an issue, because Fulton Sheen was able to deal with a lot of these things diplomatically. And of course, I think this is why people are now scratching their heads saying, well, he was accused of a mishandling of a priest from 1963. Well, that's all been cleared up, because we knew all along that Fulton Sheen was never involved to put anyone at danger, at risk. And so that was clarified again. So I like to say that there is no new revelations at all to say we missed this. No, everything's been cleared. And this is why we're saying today, in the year 2023, let's get the new date. We've waited long enough. There has been no new revelations by any court or anyone, but still it's one of these things where it's just, we have to say Rome moves slow. When they say Rome wasn't built in a day, and sometimes causes don't happen overnight, they take time. So, but in God's perfect timing, I like to say that in God's perfect timing. So we will see that. But again, no news is good news. And we haven't heard any negative news in all these years. And we kind of knew that there would never be any news because of what Sheen has done for so many people. People who meet Fulton Sheen in person say, the man was holy. He took an interest in everyone. You could just know there was something very special about him. And I think that rings true even today as we watch his old videos, listen to his talks. We know that there's a saint among us. So again, I think we'll wait a little while longer. Patience is a virtue. That's what they say. And we will have some more patience. But
definitely. And one thing I wanted to touch on is I was always so amazed, because I don't know if this was in Treasure and Clay or one of his talks that there was a seminarian that was pursuing the priesthood for his own glory rather than the glory of God. And Sheen had seen that, and he said, "I will not ordain you."
Yes.
And I was always so amazed by that story. Could you share a little more on that, Al?
Oh, yeah. And that was when he went to Rochester. He, of course, knew he was going to ordain priest. And so he went to the seminary and visited the seminarians. And, many people know Father Andrew Apostoli, God rest his soul. And he was the first ordination of a priest that Fulton Sheen did when he came to Rochester. And, of course, Father Andrew Apostoli has been a great friend to the cause as the vice postulator and a promoter of Sheen's works. But he went, and of course, there was a number of seminarians, and he could just tell by talking to them that they weren't, cut out to be priests. He didn't want them as their priest. And so he did, say to this priest, and not this priest, but this seminarian, you're not, you don't have the right heart, and it was his mother that came up to him after and said, thank you for not ordaining my son. I always knew there was something not right here. And mothers know their sons best, right? And so I remember reading that too, that it was not just the asking the seminarian to step aside, but also the family members saying thank you for being a great bishop and overseeing that, because every priest that Archbishop Sheen ordains is a priest's son, and he wants good sons. He wants good sons, so, and not troubled sons. So again, that was the gift of his sacrament. Sometimes, again, bishops have to make these hard decisions, and when they oversee seminaries, sometimes they have to say, "You might have a call, but it's a two-way street. It has to work both ways." And so sometimes they have to say no. And it's a godly thing. It's the Holy Spirit working. So again, to add to that story, that's what I've heard too. So it's exactly what we thought. Everything was okay back then, and it's okay now. So let's celebrate together as a church and declare Fulton Sheen blessed. And so I think this is a reason for our concern, in the sense that we've waited long enough, we like to think. And I have to be honest, we have been spoiled. The canonization of John Paul II was relatively quick. The canonization of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, that was a very quick process. And I think we got spoiled, because when you think of great Catholic saints today, you think Mother Teresa, John Paul II, and Fulton Sheen, all in the same breath. So I think we were expecting Fulton Sheen to be a rather quick process. But when it took some time, we're all asking questions. Why? But it's okay to ask the question why. I mean, Fulton Sheen in his writings says that it's okay to ask why, because even our Lord on the cross said, my God, why? So it's okay. But I think, again, God has a plan. And Fulton Sheen is even more popular today, I think, because of this delay in his beatification than ever before. So again, God has a special plan. And of course, our lives are worth living. And he said that in his television series. And so we're going through the process together. We're riding on this ship that hopefully will coast into a good port one of these days soon. And I, make telephone calls to the good folks in Peoria. I'm still very friendly with many of the staff there. And they've told me, again, they're just waiting for the Vatican to send them a new date. And of course, they need to send their people over to America, and we need to work on times, dates, venues, things like that. There's always going to be the critics, like even when they give us a new date, then they're going to say, well, you got to change this venue. Like, my solution is this: you do it in New York City, at one of those big stadiums in New York, the Giant Stadium or Yankee Stadium or whatever. You cut off Fulton Sheen's right arm, and you bring that relic to New York for the beatification mass, and you gift Sheen's right arm to St. Patrick's Cathedral. And then the rest of the body stays in Peoria, and everybody comes to Peoria for a pilgrimage. And you do the New York thing, everyone can fly in. You say that they can have 150,000, 200,000. And, we're used to chopping up saints' arms, legs, So that's my
I gotta
solution.
say, that is the only thing that I will concede. Not the only thing, I'll concede a couple, but relics and cutting people up. I just find that so bizarre. I understand. I've heard all the apologetic stuff, but I just find that so odd.
Right. Yeah. Now I wasn't now I've got relics behind me, right? And I got relics thing. Like I have holy face relics, the relics of Veil of Veronica, but this one is, so this is a relic of Saint Joseph. This is a piece of his pallium.
Friends, some time ago, a certain postmaster in the United States came to see me. He had received a letter that was addressed simply to the good Lord. So he brought the letter to me. Oh, do not be surprised that I'm addressed that way. You'd be surprised in how many American homes it is said, "Good Lord, is he on again?" So we opened the letter, and the writer asked the good Lord for $50. The postmaster said, "What do you think we ought to do about it?" I said, "Well, in order that he will not lose faith in divinity, I will send him 25. So I sent 25. 2 weeks later, the postmaster came back with another letter addressed to the good Lord, and the writer said, "The last time I asked for $50. I am asking for $50 again. Only this time, please send the money through Cardinal Spellman, because Bishop Sheen cheated me out of 25. That experience creates the problem of who is the good neighbor. And once there was a lawyer who asked that question of our divine Lord. The lawyer first asked what he had to do to be saved, and our blessed Lord asked him what the law read, and after saying that he had to love God and the neighbor, then the lawyer said, "But who is my neighbor?" And our blessed Lord answered it by telling the story of the Good Samaritan. And the point of the parable was not who is my neighbor, but have you the neighborly spirit? In other words, instead of asking, is this a worthy object of charity, our blessed Lord implied we should ask if we are a worthy subject. And that parable of the Good Samaritan, as the Savior told it, was about a man who went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. And one does go down from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's a distance of about 24 miles, and the descent is about 3,000 feet. Jericho is about 600 feet below the level of the Mediterranean. There's only one part in that road where there could possibly be an inn. There's only one place where there's water, and there's only one place where there's a plateau. Everywhere along that road that is still called the Bloody Road, it is possible for robbers to hide. I remember some years ago I was going down that road, and I stopped at an inn. And there was an Arab at the inn, and I said, "Did you ever hear the story of the Good Samaritan?" He said, "No." And I said, "You know, you're losing good business because everybody else knows the story of the Good Samaritan. This is the inn to which he was brought." So I asked for a bucket of paint. He gave me a bucket of red paint, and I painted the sign, "The Good Samaritan Inn." Well, our blessed Lord told the story of the man who went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, was attacked by robbers, left half wounded, and a priest and a Levite passed the wounded man by, and then this Samaritan, a member of the despised race, took the man on his beast, brought him to the inn, poured in oil and wine into his wounds, and gave the innkeeper 2 days' wages, and asked the innkeeper to care for him, and then said, "I will come back again and pay you what I owe over and above what I have given you." And the Good Samaritan was the one who had compassion on the wounded man. Such was the parable, which you know very well. Now let us modernize it and break it down into the problem of modern social work and social problems in general. There are 4 questions that we may ask. First, who creates social problems? Secondly, who ignore social problems? 3, professional workers. And 4th, after professional workers, I should say those who work out of duty. And 4th, the real solution, which is love, in contrast with duty. First, who creates social problems? Well, the original social problem in this parable was created by an act of violence, namely the robbers. And almost all social problems today are created by violence. The Second World War of ours begot 63 million refugees, many of whom threw themselves upon the earth as something more friendly than the hearts of men. 2 million refugees have crowded out of the eastern zone of Germany into the western zone for aid. They were the victims of violence. 2 million Chinese have come down from communist China down into Hong Kong, where there's an attempt made now to care for them. It's interesting that all the refugees are out from the lands of communist violence. Nobody is a refugee going back into those lands. Not even the communists who are arrested when they're in this country and are offered an opportunity to go to Russia rather than to go to jail. They always say, no, sir, I'll take an American jail, but I'll not go back to Russia. And then there's another kind of violence that creates social problems. It's not those who steal possessions and lands, but rather those who steal from the young the image of God that is in them. The educators who tell them that they have no intellect, they have no will, they have no soul, that they're just beasts, animals. Well, if they're just beasts, we should not be surprised that they will grow up to act like beasts. They're robbed of a great spiritual heritage. These help create the social problem. That brings us to the second question, namely, who ignore the social problem? Well, the social problem is ignored, first of all, by the communists. The communist philosophy is this, and here I'm quoting Marx. A person of and by himself is without any value. Unless an individual belongs to the revolutionary class, he is without worth. Hence, communism is willing to liquidate millions of people. So long as that socialistic, communistic core or species continues to exist, they are the ones who pass by the wounded people of earth. They are the continuators of the priest and Levite who pass by the wounded man. And incidentally, I wondered what they did after they passed by that wounded man. You know what I think they did? I think they went either to Jerusalem or Jericho and reported the matter to organized charities. After first filling out 5 long blanks, then there are others who ignore the social problem. There is a minority, and thank God it is only a minority in this country in the field of social work, who have been influenced by the Marxist or communist philosophy, and who believe that there are only social problems and not personal problems.
They believe that you can manipulate society like you manipulate machinery. And once you understand social laws thoroughly, then all individual problems will be solved. This is not the truth. The only way one can ever remake society is by remaking persons. One cannot remake persons by remaking society, because society is basically made up only of individuals and persons. With this group who insist upon social control to the forgetfulness of individual control, insist that you always have to make long investigations before you can ever solve any problem. Hence the tendency today, even among foundations, to spend great fortunes making investigations, but not helping people directly. Now, it's all right to make investigations when the alternatives are unknown. For example, suppose you wanted to find out which do the American people like better, a singing commercial or a spoken commercial? Or a red commercial, that is, a red commercial or a blue commercial. The blue one is sung. Well, you would have to carry on an investigation to find that out. But when people are in need, when they're hungry, when they're unclothed, then one does not make an investigation. One first feeds and clothes them, cares for them, and then one finds out the number. That was what our blessed Lord did when he found the multitude in the desert. He said they were as sheep without a shepherd. And so he fed them all. And in feeding them, he discovered that there were 5,000. Some time ago, there was a picture magazine that carried a series of photographs of someone in the subway steps of New York. This individual was wounded or he fainted, and the photographer stood there for an hour. And he took pictures of everyone passing by this wounded man. The pictures appeared in this magazine in order to indicate that no one was interested in the individual. Why didn't the photographer help? Glory be to God. I hope if I ever fainted on this program that the cameramen would run to my aid instead of taking pictures of it. And then, too, there must have been a number of people, when they saw the photographer there taking pictures, they thought, well, maybe this is a movie, or it's something framed, but it certainly is not reality. But these are the people who pass by the wounded of the earth, because they're more interested in this fictitious social than they are in the individual and in the person himself. And that brings us to the third division of the parable, namely the professional workers. Now, by the professional worker, we do not mean the organized worker. The distinction between the professional worker and those who offer the real solution is the distinction between duty and love. The professional worker is here understood as one like the innkeeper who receives a wage for doing great social work. But he works out of duty, just as the innkeeper received 2 days' pay. But it was necessary for the loving hands of the Samaritan to come back to aid the professional worker. Now, the professional workers are not necessarily in religious organizations. A professional worker could be in a secular organization and still work out of love. And it is even possible that there could be some social workers in religious organizations that were working out of duty and not out of love. Despite all the good that the duty worker does, it is not yet the real solution of the problem of charity, for the simple reason that they always work within limits. They believe in moderation. You never go too far. In other words, we close at 5. You say that there is that the family has not had food in 24 hours and you have no coal? Well, sorry, this is Washington's birthday, and call us on Monday and we will handle your case. There is apt to be that danger of moderation, which is not the way of love and charity. And incidentally, too, it is well for the people of a democracy to realize that they must not throw all the burdens of social workers, of social problems, upon professional workers and professional organizations. Suppose I had an automobile, and I gave the right to drive the automobile to the governor. I gave the right to fill the air with hot air to the ward leader. I gave the right to buy gas to the lieutenant governor. Well, it wouldn't be long until I would no longer be free to drive the automobile. And as American people surrender responsibility for the poor and the sick and the aged in their community, they also surrender their democracy. The best preservative of freedom in any democracy is a recognition that we all have responsibility to the poor, sick, burnt, anemic members of our society. The real solution is the solution of love. The Good Samaritan who had compassion. And love here means three things. To the one who loves the poor, he always believes that the rich need the poor more than the poor ever need the rich. And by the rich, I mean only those who have relatively more than those who have not. Why do the poor need the rich? In order that they may have a roof over their heads, food in their stomach, clothes in their back, shoes in their feet. Why do the rich need the poor? In order that they may justify their stewardship of wealth. In order that they may thank God for the blessings that they have received. In order that they may have His grace in their hearts and His blessing on their being. The poor need the rich only for material reasons. But the rich need the poor for spiritual reasons. And that was why our blessed Lord said that those who have money are to use their money to make friends. Make friends with the mammon of iniquity. The mammon of iniquity meaning money. Give it to the poor, and they will intercede for you on the last day. As a beggar once said to me in Madrid outside of a church, he said, listen, if you don't give to me, who will intercede for you in the last day? And then those who love also have a different way of handling the poor than anyone else. This is the way most of our charity and philanthropy is. It's vertical. This is a house. It's a... Well, now, it looks like one so far, doesn't it? This is the first story. This is the second story. On the second floor of this house, the rich live. That is to say, merely those who have. And down here is a poor family. Now, those who have, in most charity, will go down to the poor, supply their needs, nurse them, care for them. But after they have done that, they go back again to the comforts and maybe luxuries of their own home. That is not perfect love. Perfect love is rather horizontal. Here are those who have, And here are those who have not. In real love, those who have pass over to those who have not, and they never again come back. They stay there until they have been relieved of their sorrow or their pain or their poverty. Just as our blessed Lord came down to this earth, crossed from the line of innocence over to the line of sinners, stayed with them, suffered with them, died for them, until he finally redeemed them. This is the kind of love that missionaries have, that will become citizens of the country in which they are missionaries, in order to better share the problems and woes and sorrows of the people for whom they care. This is the love of saints, the love that transforms the world. And finally, those who love know that everything must be done for a divine motive. To give a drink of water in his name. And on the last day, even the great lovers of the poor will be surprised. For on that day of the great assize, when God judges them, even the just, the saved, the great good social workers will say, will ask our Lord a question when he will say, I was hungry, and you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me to drink. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. These great lovers of the poor, who did things in his name, will be surprised that he was so pleased. And they will wonder when. The nurse will wonder when. And she will ask when. You mean when I took care of patient in room 238? You mean this file number 164? I cared for you. And the Savior, when they ask when, will say to them, when you did it to the least of these, my brethren, you did it unto me. Unto me. When people die, their friends ask, how much did they leave? And the angels of heaven asked, how much did they take with them in love?
It began here, in the upper room, 2,000 years ago. This is my body. This is my blood. Remember me. In a garden he prayed to his Father on a night of betrayal, torture, death, far from Galilee. When taken from his rack of torment, in a borrowed grave he lie. On the third day the angel said, he has risen. He did not die. After sharing with friends, he rose to the Father, leaving his spirit love to guide our journey. For he is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, together again. People of all faiths recognized Bishop Fulton J. Sheen as one of the greatest communicators of the 20th century. He was born in El Paso, Illinois, in May of 1896. As a young boy, he knew he wanted to be a priest. He served as an altar boy at St. Mary's Cathedral in Peoria, Illinois. At St. Viator College, his education and debating skills taught him the skills he used throughout his life. His unique ability at being natural and at ease in front of any audience was noted early in his ministry. He was ordained in 1919 and went on to become one of the best-known and greatly loved priests in church history. He wrote 96 books and hundreds of articles and columns. He broadcast numerous radio and TV programs. People from all faiths watched him on television because he spoke to every man. They always waited with joy for his goodbye, his blessing, God love you. It continues to give us joy and memories.
Bye now, and God love you.
Bishop Fulton J. Sheen went to be with the Lord in December of 1979. Fulton J. Sheen, requiescat in pace.
Friends, this show is completely unrehearsed. The only part of it that can be done over is the announcement. Now, just a couple of minutes ago, we started filming it, and the announcer gave the title. Stop, world, I want to get on. And some woman shrieked at the title, and we had to do it over. I hope it appears that funny to you. I must tell you, first of all, about some things that happened to me. I was preaching not very long ago, and I noticed down in the front pew a mother with a 3 or 4 year old boy, and she was trying to keep him very quiet. But after I had talked for 15 minutes that must have seemed 15 hours to him, he tugged at his mother's sleeve, and he says, "Mommy, is it really that hard to get to heaven?" And another little boy, when he went to confession, he had in the back of his mind the commandments. And he could be heard going through the commandments in one fashion or another, and then after he had named them to himself, then he would begin the confession of sins. And he was saying, no strange gods before me. No, I didn't adore any strange gods. Thou shalt keep holy the name of the Lord. I cursed a couple of times, Father, and keep holy the Sabbath day. I went to Mass every Sunday. Honor the father and mother. I disobeyed my mother about 18 times and my father about 6 times. Thou shalt not kill. I didn't kill anybody. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Sister told me to skip that. I remember going into one classroom and saying to a little boy, "Tell me what you have to do to get forgiveness of sins." He said, "You have to sin first." Well, you heard the title. The title was actually inspired by a show that was here on Broadway a few years ago. Stop, world, I want to get off. Now we're changing that to stop, world, I want to get on. Why are we changing it? Obviously, stop, world, I want to get off is because people are just sick of living. Our point is that perhaps never before were men so concerned with the world as they are at the present time. It has always been a concern, of course. Remember Shakespeare? All the world's a stage, and men and women merely actors. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. Wordsworth, he was somewhat disgusted with it. The world is too much with us, late and soon. And I'm sure that Thomas Hood, if he had lived in our times, would have said, "Stop, world, I want to get off," because he wrote, "The world is a wilderness, and every tree bears the burden of our tears." Those are the old views. But I wonder if ever in human history the world, I do not mean the spirit of the world, just the world itself and all that that word can mean, was ever so much the concern of hearts as at the present time. Just let me give you some examples of how the world has been discovered, why it is a concern. First of all, our age has discovered humanity. Humanity. The world is one. We're all born of one blood. We're very much concerned about the gap that exists between the rich nations and the poor nations. It burdens our consciences that by the year 2000, according to the UN, it will be necessary for Asia to have 4 times the amount of food it has at the present time. Latin America will have to have 4 times the amount of food as now, and Africa 3 times. So humanity concerns us. Then we have another interest in the world. We have the interest of science, technology. Our knowledge has probably increased more in the last 100 years than it did in, well, all previous history. It almost seems as if to our generation has been given the capacity to unlock all of the secrets of nature. Remember the poet who said, "I drew the bolt of nature's secrecies." One can imagine all the secrets of nature pouring out. So that we live not just in a world of gadgetry, we live in this beautiful world of technology. And finally, the world has become our concern through what might be called world involvement. In other words, there is a fondness today for doing social work, helping the minorities, bettering the inner city, helping those that are socially disinherited. Young men and women are dedicated today, as they never have been, to all of these social causes. They want to be, as they say, involved in the world. I remember during the council, I was waiting one day for the bus that took us to the council, and I saw a street cleaner in front of the hotel where I was staying, and I went up to him and I said, "How long will you work today?" He said, 12 hours. "What time did you get up?" He said, 4 o'clock this morning. And I said, "What is your duty?" He says, "Nothing but just sweeping the gutters." About a mile of gutters here in Rome. "How much do you earn?" He told me it was really a trivial wage. I said, tell me your philosophy of life. And he said, you're going to the council, aren't you? Yes. You're going to make important decisions for the church and the world. Yes. He said, but if I clean my gutters with a greater dedication than you do that work, the Lord is far more pleased with me. That's right. He saw that we have work in the world, and it can be a dedicated and divine and holy work. Now, this is the good side. There's a kind of a bad side to this, too. I'm going to mention it for just a few minutes, and then I'm going to get back again to the good side. This concern with the world is called secularism. Its bad side is that some would like to do away with the divine and the sacred. We've had a series of thinkers in our day that believe that in order to uphold the world, one has to destroy the divine. That's one of the reasons, incidentally, for the God is dead movement. These poor thinkers believe that in order to make room for the world, you got to get rid of God. Bultmann says in order to make room for the Christian message, you have to get rid of the historical Christ, practically. And we have the author of Secular City. He practically identifies the secular city and the kingdom of God. And even in the field of religion itself, today the holy are on the defensive. This world spirit has gotten hold of us to such an extent that many do not like the holy. I may tell you that it's gotten so bad that when any of you people see us priests on our knees, you ask us if we lost our contact lenses. Well, that's enough of that. So now let's get back to the good side of the world. These are great ideas. This spirit is magnificent. But who are most responsible for these ideas? Oh, secular-minded men? I will not give you the three names at once. First one was John the 23rd. Who did more for our love of humanity today than this man? Who? Auguste Comte, with his supposed love of humanity, never wrote a line comparable to John's love of the poor. He opened the council, brought the world into it. Protestants, Orthodox, Buddhists, Hindus, communists, everyone was welcome. As one poor workman said about the Vatican one day, he's not interested in politics at all, except inasmuch as politics is related to us poor people. That's right. He was the one who made the world conscious of the love of humanity, even when, for example, we used our science to send an astronaut around the earth. Because I remember when that happened, John the 23rd quoted the book of Genesis and said, God said, rule over the earth and subject it. He saw this young American astronaut as indicating the great scientific progress of mankind. No wonder his last words were, Lord, that they may be one. And then that human side of John, great big fat man he could reach out those great arms of his almost like the fleshy columns of Bernini to bring all mankind within his grasp. One day he went into a prison, visited the prisoners, and as he passed one cell, he said, "Who's in there?" The warden says, "That's the death cell. That man in there killed his wife." John spoke to him from outside the bars. He wouldn't answer, Pope John. So Pope John said to the warden, "Let me in." The man faced the wall, would not turn around. John said to him, "Young man." Oh, yes, he said, what is he in here for? And the warden said, "He killed his wife." John said, "Young man, I've never been married. But do you know that if I were married, I might have killed my wife too?" With that, the prisoner turned around and embraced John. This is the humanity that he taught us to love. Now let's go to science and the world of technology. Who has done most to elevate the dignity of science, to give it a new view of things, and almost to write a scientific genesis? Who? Teilhard de Chardin. This great French scientist, as a little boy, was interested in rocks. And he was interested in rocks somehow or other because he saw the creative hand of God inside of the rocks. He grew up with a great devotion to what was the favorite devotion of his mother, called the Heart of Christ, but he got quite beyond the pious conception of his mother. As he traveled around the world many times, excavated, dug, came up with prehistoric men, was inducted to into the great scientific academies of the world, there was one great notion that obsessed Teilhard. It was the notion of an arrow being directed toward its target. First of all, there has to be a mind that directs that arrow. And there has to be a target fixed before the arrow is ever shot. Let that arrow stand for the evolution of the universe. And he believed in the evolution of the universe. But it's working toward a target. And somewhere there was an archer that shot it. So Teilhard de Chardin saw the whole universe ablaze with Christ. All things were made by the power of his word. All things were for him. And so deeply did this embed itself in the scientific concept of the universe that one day in the Gobi Desert, he could not read Mass. And he wrote this prayer. Since I, your priest, O Lord, have this day neither bread, nor wine, nor altar, I am going to spread my hands over the entire universe and take its immensity as the matter of my sacrifice. Is not the infinite circle of things the ultimate host that will be transformed? Is not the seething crucible wherein mingle and boil up all the operations of living and cosmic substances the chalice of pain that you desire us to sanctify? So let there be repeated again today and tomorrow and forever, until the transformation shall have been exhaustively effected in the divine words, "This is my body." I wish I had other texts. Time, but I have only 4 minutes. To develop the thought of Teilhard, I might someday give his whole theology of science. But here was a man who brought science into the forefront of modern thinking for all men who love the world, because to him this cosmos was sacred. And just as John saw Christ in all humanity, here was a man who saw Christ also in everything that was scientific and cosmic. And finally, who gave us world involvement? A Lutheran minister, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A brilliant young man who said, "I would hate to live to be 40, and he never did. Was invited here to America to give lectures. He said, "This is not my place. With the Nazi persecution going on, I must go back again to Germany." He resisted the Nazis and was put in prison. And just as John saw Christ in all humanity, Teilhard de Chardin saw Christ in the cosmos, so Dietrich de Bonhoeffer saw him involved in everything that was worldly, in every kind of social service, in law, in medicine, in everything. He said, mentioned a couple of words that have been taken up by people who live by quotations. He spoke of a religionless religion, which unthinking people translate into a philosophy of life. By religionless religion, he simply meant that it shouldn't be too churchy. In other words, that the church should become involved. Here are his exact words as he was in prison. Just as in Christ the reality of God entered the reality of the world. That was the incarnation. So too that which is Christian is to be found in the world, the holy in the profane. So I would not speak of God on the borders of life, but at its center, in its life, in its prosperity. God is the beyond in the midst of life. And Christians must participate in the sufferings of Christ in this worldly life. And so he said that you never can look at the world without God, and you never can look at God without the world. This was his notion. And he died for it. And on April the 9th, 1945, the Nazis came. Do I have 20 seconds or a minute and 20? The Nazis came to him and told him that he was to be hanged. The Nazi doctor saw him in his prison cell in prayer. He spent 45 minutes every morning in meditation, 45 minutes every night. He was led to the gallows. The gallows swung 6 o'clock on that April 9th morning, 1945. And the doctor who attended him said, in all of my 40 years of medicine, I have never seen a man so calm, so resigned, and so submissive to the world of God, to the will of God. This was Bonhoeffer, the real Bonhoeffer. And so the world is a great and a good place to live in. But who made it? God is dead men? No, to make room for the world. These are the men who made the world. And the world is worth living in, and the world is worth saving. If I could sing for you after that telecast, I would sing, "It's a great, big, wide, wonderful world we live in." Bye now, and God love you.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees. The bishop wrote 94 books, recorded countless radio shows, and appeared on hundreds of network and syndicated television programs. His legacy is a treasure of joy that transcends time and helps us to believe that truly life is worth living. The vast white beauty of the season of winter reaches gracefully toward the sleeping mountains, and there, in the beauty of its flowing crystal sculptures, we miss seeing the simple presence of color. Even our warm, wild creatures know it's not easy finding green under a blanket of snow, but it's nice to have a friend to help you look. It is in this season of winter that we celebrate the Bethlehem birth of the child Jesus. Bishop Sheen says, "It was a breakthrough in time that changed our world, for we found a belief that is the love of the truth."
Unbelief is dread of the truth about ourselves. That's unbelief. Faith is a willingness to face the truth about ourselves. And when we do, well, once that original dread is overcome and we admit the breakthrough, then we're changed. And then our mind is illumined, our will is strengthened, we have a great joy and happiness.
She's lovely, isn't she? Beautiful. Hi there. I'm Cameron Mitchell, and I want to wish happy holidays to all of you. Christmas is our time of love and goodwill, a moment in the portrait of history when a bright silver star high in the night sky gave off a close and holy light, and the world in solemn stillness lay to hear the angels sing. Christmas is also a time of giving, and we've wrapped up a special present just for you, filled with hugs, kisses, joy, hope, and sunshine. It's a Christmas gift of love from a friend of yours, Fulton J. Sheen. He calls it Superman and Christmas, a unique comparison of fantasy and truth, a breakthrough in history, blessed by the birth of a child of grace, peace, and love.
Friends, a mother told her little boy to go into the parlor and turn on television. He was distracting the mother. And he turned the dial, and he caught a picture of me on television. He ran out, said to his mother, "Ma, Superman." Well, here is Superman in a new costume with even a new title tonight, Superman and Christmas. What has Superman got to do with Christmas? You know what Superman does, Batman.
And then these men we have from other planets. Isn't it interesting how many of those we have in our world today who, first of all, seem to come from somewhere else, just as Superman does. And quickly he changes his costume. He goes into a telephone booth or a closet, just as an ordinary mortal, and he puts on the form and the habit of Superman. And then once he's broke through with this great power of his, then he begins to do wonders. He relieves us in our afflictions, helps damsels in distress, defends those who have been persecuted, lover of the poor and the socially disinherited. And this intensely pleases the American people. Why is it that programs of this kind are so popular? I think there's a subconscious reason, almost an unconscious one. First of all, we know that the help that we need is not just among us ordinary mortals and the affairs of daily life. If we are to have the inner strength that we need, it has to come from outside. We've never expressed this, perhaps in so many words, but we know the need of it. And Superman, Batman, and men from other worlds, they satisfy our needs, at least from the point of view of imagination. They give us what we lack. We know that of and by ourselves we are not enough. Just as the music that we love is the music we already have in our own hearts, so too the amusements that we like are the unconscious expressions of hidden desires. Superman is the desire for Christmas. It should not be hard for our generation to understand Christmas. Now, I'm going to show you how Superman and Christmas are somewhat alike. I really didn't need to use this blackboard tonight, but I'm going to use it just for this one illustration so my angel can clean it. It would be terrible to have a Christmas show and not use my angel. The Superman comes from outside. There's a kind of a breakthrough. Is that clear? Oh, yes, it gets clearer, doesn't it? As you're right. This is unusual chalk. Invisible chalk. First, there's a breakthrough. And then, because he helps others, there is a kind of a renovation, a strengthening, an aiding. Now, Christmas is just this. First, there is a breakthrough. And instead of someone going into a closet and taking on the form and the substance of a Superman, the breakthrough this time is the God coming down to earth, breaking through time splitting it. Splitting it so much so that from that time on to this, it's BC and AD. But there's this difference from Superman, and this is very important. Superman goes from weakness to power. The breakthrough of Christmas is from power to weakness. You saw the picture of the crib when the show began. Here is infinity and littleness. See, this isn't a man getting strong. This is a God becoming weak. He who made the world is in the world, even rejected by it. He who made the nest is nestled therein. The tiny little hands that are not quite long enough to reach the huge heads of the cattle are the hands that hold the reins, that steer the sun and moon and stars in their courses. He's wrapped in swaddling bands. Divinity, enclosed, wrapped, confined, cabin, cribbed, helpless as a babe. What a difference between Superman and this breakthrough. Not a manifestation of power to please the pride of man, but humility to humble man's pride. This idea of a God becoming a man that you saw there in the crib is something that's very hard for us to realize. Just suppose you love dogs, and you were sorrowful for the way dogs were treated by some masters or neglected. And you had the power to dispossess yourself of your body. But you could do with your soul what you wanted. And you took that soul of yours and you put it into the body of a dog. And when you did that, you would resolve, but rarely to exceed the limitations of that dog organism. What a humiliation that would be. You know that you had a mind that could write poetry and that could study science and absorb literature and understand Dante and Aquinas, and yet here you were in the body of a dog. And then there would be another humiliation. And that other humiliation would be because you went into the organism of a dog, you would have to associate with other dogs, knowing all the while that you were better, that you were a man. You think it humbling to become a dog just simply to give dogs examples of good conduct? Well, what do you think it is for this breakthrough? Not going into a closet, but going into a stable and a crib. Being bound with swaddling bands. That's the difference in the Superman. Weakness instead of power. And then the other difference is that Superman, when he comes to this earth of ours to do his wonders, only touches the environment. He touches what is outside of man. In other words, I've never seen chalk like that before. Angel, where did you get it? You've got to wait for an effect. It's like telling a funny story. It just doesn't happen all at once. All the Superman does is to change circumstances on the outside. But he does not touch man on the inside. That's the difference. And when God becomes man, when we have Christmas, he leaves circumstances very much the way they are. He leaves Roman soldiers parading through the streets. The same problems. Pain and suffering and hunger and so forth. But he begins reforming the hearts of men. And once they are reformed, then if they live according to his way, then they'll do away with these boring things of indigence and suffering. So the God-man works in the heart of a man. It's very much as if, now I wonder if my angel will use an invisible eraser. Now, this internal operation of God when he comes to this earth may be likened to a plague. Suppose that there was something in the world today like the Black Death during the Middle Ages. Remember, that wiped out 1/3 of the population of Europe? And suppose a great scientist found a remedy for that plague. And he made the remedy available to the whole human race. There would be some who would come to be relieved. Others might not. Now that's just exactly what happened when God came to this earth. We're all willing to have our circumstances changed. We like to have more money. Maybe live in a different house. But do we want our thinking changed? We want our loves changed? And the God-man who came to this earth came for the remedy for moral and spiritual plagues. Came to make us happy on the inside. Not everyone wants it. He came into his own, and his own received him not. Now this is Christmas in terms of the Superman. Now let me reduce it to a concrete case. The breakthrough, how he operates through what we call his grace. It means an illumination of the intellect and a strengthening of character. I did a great deal of work in my life in Soho Square district of London, which is the international area of London. And in one church there, because I was an American, I had to get up early and read the first Mass. The English sleep late. Well, this was Christmas morning. Christmas. And that night there had been a heavy London fog. Believe me, our smogs here in New York are nothing compared to the fog of London. When I opened the door, a limp figure fell in. It was a young woman. She'd been asleep against the door. It was almost frozen. And I said, how did you happen to be here? She said, I don't know, Father. I said, oh, Father? Yes, she said, I used to be a Catholic, but not anymore. I said, how did you happen to be here? Well, she said, I don't know, I was a bit drunk. Well, I said, men often drink because they like the stuff, and women drink because they don't like something else. What didn't you like? Well, she said, I didn't like the three men. She says that I was going with, and they were beginning to find it out. I was playing false to them. So I got drunk. What is your name? She told me her name.
pointing to a billboard on the Cross and Blackwell Jam office building across the way. I said, "Is that your picture there?" "Yes," she says, "I'm the leading lady in that musical comedy." Well, I went in, made her a cup of coffee, and I said, "Come back now this afternoon." And she said, "I will come back on one condition. That you don't ask me to go to confession." I said, "All right." She said, "I want you to promise me faithfully that you will not ask me to go to confession." I said, "I promise you faithfully not to ask you to go to confession." So she came back that afternoon before matinee, and I said, "We have a Rembrandt and a Van Dyck in this church. Would you like to see them?" She said, "Yes." So as we walked down the side aisle, we passed the confessional box. I pushed her in. I didn't ask her to go. I always keep my promises. Well, she went to communion. She was there month after month, and then she became a nun in London. And she's still living as a nun. Now here you see the breakthrough. Not the breakthrough into a crib, but the breakthrough, well, into a stable, a heart that's a stable. And then when the breakthrough happened, there was a change, a renovation of heart and character, so that she was no longer what she was before. It was not the outside that was changed, it was the inside. Now that's what Christmas is. Christmas is not just something that has happened, it's something that is happening. And some of us, we're afraid of it. It's very much like people go through life not knowing they have cancer. They're unhappy, they're sick, they're a bit miserable, but they don't know why. If a doctor tells them that they have cancer, then their whole attitude toward life changes. They may be able eventually to find a remedy. So people stay away from this babe of Christmas. They stay away from Christ. They're a bit afraid. Unbelief is dread of the truth about ourselves. That's unbelief. Faith is a willingness to face the truth about ourselves. And when we do, well, once that original dread is overcome and we admit the breakthrough, then we're changed. And then our mind is illumined, our will is strengthened, we have a great joy and happiness. So I say, therefore, it's hard for some people to accept Christmas. But I'm going to give you a tip, because I'm talking to everybody. I always do on television. If you do not want to start there, in that stable, with the full recognition of that breakthrough, I will tell you where to start. Start loving your fellow man. Start loving your neighbor. And begin to love him, not just because of what he can do for you, or because of any pleasure anyone gives you, but just love him as a fellow man, and then eventually you begin to see that he's a creature of God. The only unhappy people in this world are the people who are selfish. And I have known in this world some people who just loved humanity. Won't you begin to love really and truly? Please do that for me, and you will eventually come to know the true meaning of Christmas. Then you'll have a Merry Christmas.
Happy Christmas, Bishop Sheen. Happy Christmas. In your presence, there is a benediction and a grace. In your memory, we have lit the candles of fellowship and hope, knowing that our experiences of unity in human relationships are more compelling than the concepts, fears, and prejudices which divide us. These tiny flames must burn in our hearts all year long. Happy Christmas, Bishop Sheen.
Bye now, and God love you.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees. The bishop wrote 94 books, recorded countless radio shows, and appeared on hundreds of network and syndicated television programs. His legacy is a treasure of joy that transcends time and helps us to believe that truly life is worth living.